Okay, more general stuff on the double. We're going to get into specific things, but I still want to do more general stuff. So basically, Tom Berg added to our knowledge of the double in the book that he wrote as an anthroposophist, or lectures that he gave as an anthroposophist, I don't remember which, called Inner Development. And those are very, very important materials, by the way. There's stuff there about the Christian Rosicrucian path that you won't find as explicitly done in Steiner's work, and there's also a description of Steiner's biography in terms of the Christian Rosicrucian path of development, which involves understanding what happens. There's 7 parts of it: washing the feet, the scourging, the crowning of thorns, the carrying the cross, the crucifixion, the death, and the resurrection. And these are all experiences that the soul has when it tries to be moral and live moral life. And a lot of things that happen to people today, for example, are related to the scourging and the crowning with thorns, and I've talked about that in my writings, and maybe we'll get into that here somewhat, I don't know. Okay, so there we are, we're going along, and we're trying to develop sort of the history of the knowledge of the double. Okay? And so Steiner says a few things, and then Tomberg comes along, and I think Inner Development maybe came out, Inner Development came out in 37 or 38, somewhere around there. And then, of course, the war intensifies things, and at a spiritual level it probably does a lot of interference with the ability of people to do good spiritual research, because the ethers are dominated by other kinds of dynamics. And then years later, in 1960, Tomberg starts going to this big library that I can never remember the name of in London, and writes his meditations on the Tarot. And then when he writes his meditations on the Tarot, in the Arcanum on the Devil, he comes back to the problem of the double again. And I mentioned a little bit there previously that that's where he talks about it as the human double as an egregore, and about the dynamics of dealing with, from that particular spiritual impulse, from the Christian Hermetic impulse, how one might deal with the Aromatic, Luciferic, and the human double. And he uses 2 words there which I think are important to understand, because they're very illuminating. And they go a little bit with, they're kind of like secondary or related qualities to the idea that Catherine gives us about absolute facts and absolute truths. The Aromatic double, he doesn't particularly call it the Aromatic double, but he talks about the persecutor. And one can introspectively become awake to this, and this is not something unknown to modern day psychology. We know that there's a dynamic in the human being that the human being experiences where something in the soul is persecuting us. And this, of course, is the Aromatic double, who sort of attacks us, attacks our idea of ourself, and so on and so forth. And the Luciferic double he uses in this Arcanum on the Devil, he describes it as the tempter. So we have these kinds of experiences. We have the persecutor, who is in the sense of the Aromatic double, who is making our I feel less than it should be. And the tempter, who is taking our I and saying, oh, gee whiz, you ought to do this, that's going to be fine, that's going to give you a good result. And of course we don't notice these things because we're not leading an introspective life. And in fact, when you get into the work I've done with it, where I talk about how when we are not consciously forming the thoughts that arise in our consciousness through what's called discursive thinking, that's the kind of thinking where I talk to myself inside my own head. That's sort of the experience we have of it. We do that kind of thinking. And of course, that's not the only kind of thinking that we do. We do all other kinds of things. You know, reverie, for example, and we picture thinking, and we do all this stuff. It's just that if you're going to be a real anthroposophist, you have to get in there and really start to observe it, and also bring forces of will awake there. But when forces of will are not awake there, when we're not applying forces of will to what goes on in there, this experience we have of discursive thinking sort of falls by default more deeply under the influence of the double. So we can go through periods where our thoughts are all about what a jerk we are and how awful we are and how worthless we are. That's the persecutor. Or we can be experiencing sort of this conflict, you know, of a temptation. Oh, let's just have another ice cream shake, you know, my goodness, that's not going to, you know. So there's the temptations, and of course that some of the temptations can be pretty bad. Wouldn't you like to, oh, your best friend's wife, she's so lonely, he's over in Iraq, you should go comfort her, and yada yada yada. Okay? And all this stuff goes on inside us, and it's kind of scary in a way. You know, you can scare yourself with this, and in fact, if you don't approach this stuff in the right way, the double will take this knowledge and make you feel bad about it, that you've got a double. Oh, you've got a double, you got the devil inside you. You know, the persecutor will take advantage of that. You know, these guys work together, these two. You know, they're very cooperative. And let me just read something I think is very important. This is from one of the Lucifer and Ehrman lectures that Steiner gave. Come on. He says on page 21, I think, of the paperback that I've got it. He says, the very purpose of our fifth post-Atlantean epoch is that man should become increasingly conscious of what takes effect through him in earthly existence. Let me read it again. The very purpose of our fifth post-Atlantean epoch is that man should become increasingly conscious of what takes effect through him in earthly existence. Okay? So let's start to work with this idea. I'm going to have to pause in a little bit, but we'll come back to it, because it's important when we want to do specific things about the double and say, look at the influence it's had on the Anthroposophical Society and movement, for example, or on our inner life. We have to have these sort of structural ideas in which to appreciate the nature of what's going on. And Steiner's pointing out to us that, well, two kinds of facts. One fact is that evil's not out there. It's inside us, to the extent that we have introduced evil into the world. And remember what I said earlier, the metaphor of the train and stuff, you know. What we tend to call evil is not really evil. It has other purposes. And this is the same with regard to the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic doubles. There's other purposes. Let me pause.